Welcome to When We Die Talks. I'm your host, Zach Ansell. In this podcast, we explore different beliefs about what happens when we die and how those ideas shape the way we live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. How was your first Christmas without your mom? How was your wedding day without your dad? If you know the pain of losing someone you deeply loved, Amori is for you. Amori is a digital life capsule that helps you reflect on mortality, navigate emotions, and create heartfelt messages for your children, so you can feel prepared and let your presence be felt through life's many moments, even when you're no longer here. Let your words become a source of strength and comfort for those who you leave behind. Tomorrow isn't promised, but your love can be. Download your mortality companion today at amori.life. That's AMORI.life, and use the code WhenWeDie50 for 50% off. Hey everyone, before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to apologize for dropping off the past couple weeks. I know it's like rule number one to be consistent in podcasting, and I definitely dropped the ball, and I didn't even let any of you know about it. I missed an episode a couple weeks ago. I stopped posting on social. The reasons behind it are numerous. Adjusting to this new life of mine has been a bigger shift than I anticipated. But to be completely honest, I kind of feel like I lost the passion for the project for a minute. It started to feel like I was just talking to myself, and with everything else going on, death wasn't necessarily the center of my thoughts. And not that it always is or that I want it to be, but it was kind of like I put it on the back burner like I have many times in my life. And like even in my meditation practice, mindfulness of death is a huge part of that for me, and I wasn't really even doing any of that. So I just kind of felt like I was avoiding it, and so I phoned it in, or at least that's how it felt. I went with the easy option, interviewing my dad. I've loved that episode. I love being able to interview him. And then I followed that up with a voicemail episode. So kind of two really easy things for me to put together. But behind the scenes, I was trying really hard to coordinate interviews, but maybe not with the full effort that I could have given. And the crazy thing is, I have some amazing people lined up. A grief poet who you'll hear from today, a pet death doula, a funeral director nicknamed the Green Reaper, and another woman who has a fascinating theory about what happens when we die. One of those interviews was supposed to be posted 2 weeks ago with a pretty tight turnaround from the interview to publishing, but we ran into some technical issues and lost half the interview, which is kind of all we managed to get done before a connection dropped. We decided to try again in person the following week, but she had 2 deaths come in last minute, so we rescheduled. And I guess maybe this is a good time to mention that she is a funeral director, so 2 deaths coming in is maybe not necessarily normal, but it's definitely part of her life. And so we rescheduled again for the following week, and then I had to cancel because my 17-year-old dog had a seizure, and I literally thought I was watching him die. He's doing fine at the moment, and we'll definitely talk more about that, but I want to save it for my conversation with the pet death doula that will be coming in a couple weeks. So there's been a lot happening, and I still want to apologize for disappearing. I had valid reasons, and I did what was best for me in the moment, but I can still feel sorry at the same time. I'm not exactly sure what sparked it, but recently the passion for the project returned, and I'm excited to move forward full steam. Without getting too woo-woo, it kind of feels like the universe just kind of opened back the possibility for it. And within a couple days, I had this great interview with Sarah, which I promise we're getting to very, very soon. A couple of voicemails came in after a long quiet period, and I went to this amazing mindfulness of death class that my meditation mentor hosted. And that's something that I'm hoping that I can offer through this podcast and this project down the road is, a way to help other people kind of be more mindful of death, because that's changed my life over the past couple of years. And so it just kind of felt like there were signs to not give up, to keep going, and reassurance that I was on the right path. Things are aligning, even though there are challenges. And I'm just genuinely so glad that all of you are here. So enough kind of on that housekeeping. Let's get into today's episode. I sit down with poet and therapist Sara Rian for a conversation that covers challenging and sensitive topics. Before we begin, I want to offer a gentle heads up. Sara and I discuss suicide and traumatic loss. I know this can be an extremely heavy subject, so please take care of yourself while listening. And if you ever feel like you're struggling or in crisis, please reach out to someone or seek support from available resources. You are not alone. Sara lost her mom to suicide in 2018 and began writing poetry as a way to process the profound grief and trauma of her loss. Her poetry collection, Then Death Came, beautifully captures the complexities of grief and the universal experience of loss. Together, we talk openly about our fears surrounding death, the isolation grief can bring, and how poetry and conversation can create spaces for healing and connection. I was deeply touched by Sara's honesty, her vulnerability, and the powerful way she helps others navigate their grief through her art. I'm grateful to share this conversation with you all today. I hope you enjoy. How are you doing?
Doing okay. Yeah, we're all right. Had some I thought the timing was almost perfect because I had like a big grief dream last night, the typical wake up kind of crying thing, and I was like, you know what? Today's a great day to go and talk about dying. I think.
Yeah.
Today's the day.
Yeah.
Today's the day. So I'm like, all right. And that could also be my brain, like what it does to prepare, right? Like when it knows you're going to talk about it, I'm like, our brains do a lot of things when we're sleeping that we don't get to like numb out or ignore or whatever. So I was like, yeah, all right. Little tired, but feeling all right. Feeling all right.
Well, anyway, thank you for doing this. I appreciate you being willing to take the time.
Well, thank you. Like I said, I have not been on a podcast that was focused around death and dying. It's always kind of like grief. It's always been more for like the living.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. Yeah, it's something new.
I'm sure we'll dive into the grief a little bit, but yeah,
probably.
I think
me. Probably.
I think when we first talked, I kind of mentioned to you that I'm an avid reader, but poetry has definitely been one thing that like I just have always like shied away from. And I don't know if I think I have iambic pentameter stuck in my head. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. I know it's Shakespeare and I know I'm supposed to be reading it in a pattern, but it's like everybody knows the song and I don't. And I'm like, am I reading this to the right beat or whatever? But I started following you and seeing your posts and just really loved your poetry. And I picked up Then Death Came. And I think it was just like, even the first poem right out of the gate, I was just like, I fortunately haven't had to deal with, I would say I haven't really had to deal with grief in the sense that the people that I've lost, it was their time. You know, it wasn't like, you know, all my grandparents, or I guess three of my grandparents, it was like they're old. I mean, my grandpa, he died at 70, probably 72, 73, I think. And it's like, that's the natural course of action. But as I'm like reading through your poetry, and I've had to be like I've had to like hold myself back. I'm like trying to just be like, all right, we're just going to read like one or two poems a day, let them resonate. Tomorrow I'll read a couple more. But right out of the gate, just the first one, I was like, man, I haven't really had to deal with much grief, but I feel like as much as I can, I feel what you're feeling. And I just thought that was very powerful and like very impressive to be able to like translate that into words and I don't know, allow someone like me to feel some of the things that you're feeling. Although I don't want it to sound like, oh yeah, I know what grief is like now, but I don't know. I just wanted to say that your work is amazing and I'm a huge fan.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh my gosh. I know that, and obviously that book saying like, then death came, right? It's obvious. Like what I write about is death loss, but everyone knows what grief feels like. Maybe not this exact grief that I write about, which obviously is very much about like a life ending. And a lot of people get the sense of the trauma aspect in there, but grief is not right, just confined to death. It's any life change, right? We know like so many things can die.
Yeah.
That aren't just like a body.
Yeah. Yeah. I've talked about a little bit like we have, and I have to change it because I really hate saying big D death. So like capital D death.
I have never heard I have never heard big D death before. And that is what a wild term. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But I had someone tell me about like, and I don't even know if they said big D death, but capital D death. But then what we experience all the time is lowercase d death, you know, like losing a job or like, I mean, my comedic life of maladies or whatever right now, of just everything falling apart is like, those are all little D deaths. And yeah, you're right. There is grief in that. And so yeah, I guess maybe the more accurate way of saying it is you're allowing me to experience grief in a different way than I've really been able to experience. And I think that's incredibly powerful as an artist. As an artist myself, I'm a photographer, and I even use that like loosely as an artist because I do it commercially. It's like I'm like so jealous because you're creating art, I think the way that art is actually meant to be created. It's like to share feelings and emotions where like my job is to help people sew shoes and clothes and stuff like that. So it doesn't feel like art all the time.
Oh, but it is. You
Some days.
you could not hand me a camera and expect me to capture anything that would get anyone to want to do or buy anything, right? Like, I mean, I'm selling people like tears, I guess, like
Which
getting a
is
lot of people
powerful.
to cry, right? But it's all, I mean, there has to be people doing art in those realms, right?
Yeah.
We need photography for that. But no, I mean, that's like really sweet feedback to know that I only talk to people who really experience death loss, and that's how they find me. It's interesting to hear it from someone who has other types, right? Like lowercase d deaths, and saying like, but I could feel it, right? Because like we're all gonna feel it eventually. That's good for me to know. That's actually helpful. Like, okay, this could be a feeling you feel one day, not to like freak anyone out, but to say like, here's a little bit of what it might feel like. You won't obviously know until it totally happens, but to not be completely blindsided by what death and dying feels like when you're still living.
Yeah.
So no, that's really helpful to know.
And I mean, I think it's hard to I don't like dealing in absolutes, but I think it's probably fair to say it's something that everyone's going to have to deal with.
Yes.
Um, at
Yes.
some point in their life, you're going to have to deal with a loss that just guts you.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, so maybe that is kind of a good segue into like your relationship with death and like kind of where your poetry comes from.
Yeah. So I know it
Big
sounds like,
questions.
yeah, I'm like, oh yeah. No. So like a lot of people know about like the poetry background, right? Like I lost my mom in 2018 to suicide and started writing after that about like it was real time processing around the grief, and it was obviously traumatic loss. There was no, you never really expect suicide loss. So it was me writing about like not just the loss but the traumatic part of it, right? So I've never heard the D. I've always heard like capital, like
Yeah.
capital T trauma, we'll say,
Yeah.
and like little T trauma, and so
Yeah.
big T trauma. So like I was experiencing this like big T trauma, and then slowly, right, as like symptoms kind of came down, and I was doing all this healing, it just like continued and kind of became more like broad grief writing. But with death, I mean, we lost pets, and I remember losing, like my great great aunt, and I remember losing, my mom's foster mom, and just weird things like, like close relationships, but I was little and I didn't quite understand. But all I know is that I was absolutely like terrified of death. I probably still am. Like, why am I on this podcast? It'll just be me
Because I'm also
freaking out.
terrified of
Yeah.
death and I'm trying to figure it out.
Yes.
And so it's honestly kind of
Yeah.
nice to find other people who might be also very scared of death and
Yeah.
trying to process it.
It's such a force. And so this community has opened this like page and all these people coming forward. And I'm also getting like death doulas and hospice nurses and all these people who are surrounded by death and are like making peace with it and helping people die with dignity and peace and no fear and all of these things. And I'm like, can I hire you now? Like, can I hire you to work with me, hopefully long before I die? Because like, I've never been good with death, not just like my own, but I'm not good with other people or other like animals dying.
Yeah.
I wrote poetry about a bug, and not a cute bug, not like a ladybug, like a centipede, ugly house, like a silverfish centipede dying by my hand. I killed it. When I was in like second grade, I wrote a poem about it and like cried to my mom. and wrote this like ode to this centipede because I like felt so bad about it dying and where it was going to go. And I can't believe I took its life. Like, so obviously I was anxious as a child if we haven't figured that out.
And we're a death poet as a child too.
Yeah. And I was like, I wouldn't say I hope I'm working more around like death phobia, and I am trying to like lean into it and talk to people about it and everything. But I was never good at losing anyone. I'm still not good at losing anyone permanently, like their physical bodies here. And I'm like, oh, I guess I probably need to actually start thinking about death and like my own death and dying. And that, no, I have not worked through the fear of that. I know it's happening.
Yeah.
And I hope that when it comes, I hope I'm not afraid. But so I think the journey with like death started even like in childhood, where I was like super freaked out about it taking people, what it would be like if it took me. And here we are, 35. I have not quite gotten through that just yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think outside of writing poems about killing insects.
I promise I'm not just like killing bugs and like, I really would want to do
this
no
is my
harm.
inspiration.
Yeah. I'm like, really, I wasn't like killing butterflies, or I was like obviously very, I don't know, empathic. I just like, that was a nasty bug to me. And I like still was so sad that its life just like ended by my hand.
And that you did it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I did that. It was really terrible. And so I wrote it a poem.
So yeah, outside of the poetry aspect, like I feel like that's a little bit of my journey. I'm 37 now, but like it was right around 35 that I was like, again, the loss that I had experienced was grandparents that, and even in the sense of they were all, it was like, none of it was like super untimely, I don't think. Even it wasn't like, oh man, all of a sudden they got sick and they died. It was kind of a prolonged, like, oh yeah, they're kind of declining, they're kind of declining, they're kind of declining. And so, but yeah, like I hit 35 and like, so I was a math person, math mind. And so I just started doing like the calculation of like, if I'm 35 and I don't even think it's necessarily 80 anymore. I think the life expectancy has actually gone down over the last couple of years. But it's like 35, 70. I'm getting pretty close to being halfway there. And it was like, oh yeah. And then it just like kind of all this like emotion welled up. And like, I remember having a couple nights where it was just like, and I keep on calling it a panic attack. My therapist is like, nah, I don't know if I'd call that a panic attack, but it was just like, just this huge weight on my chest and like, I can't breathe. And everything feels heavy. And it's like, so I just I say panic attack, but almost more like an existential attack. And at that point it was like, okay, I need to find a way to deal with these emotions. And so like your way of, and maybe it's not at this point a way, although I would say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do feel like you are processing your own death in ways by writing your poetry and dealing with grief. That's what this project is for me, is a way for me to like talk to other people, have some death positivity. It's just a constant battle. But I do think the one thing for me is, and I don't know if this is for you too, but like in thinking about death and talking about death, and I think it's also just getting older, I kind of don't care anymore about failing. I'm going to do this. And like, if I fail, like, okay, like I'd rather try than not. And so I'd say that maybe is the one benefit so far, but I still feel like I'm very terrified of death.
Yeah. I mean, it like, when you think about it, no, I agree. I think this has been a space where I am not avoiding, right? This topic that we all avoid. We're very death phobic, right? We avoid this topic. We avoid grief, but again, that's like grief is for like the living, but like avoiding thinking about death, which is like also going to be my experience and everyone I know. I'm like, unless they come out with some stuff, right? Which I don't know what kind of dystopian world we're going to be in. But like, as of right now, I can say like, we're all going to die. And I'm like, wow, I really do try to avoid this. I too sit at night and will just say, gosh, what do you think happens? And I don't know if it's anxiety, weight, or attack, or it's just this feeling of like dread and like fear. And I'm like, I don't have the answers. I have never been someone that said like, I know what happens. This is my true belief. I have this like curiosity, open-ended thing that does not bring all that much comfort. And I understand why people do have like strong beliefs around it, because it's very comforting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, gosh, I wish I just believed in something like wholeheartedly that isn't just like it goes black and like your soul is gone, or if there even is a soul, right? There's a lot of debate around that, but like who you are and your consciousness and everything is just like, and fin, right? Like done.
Yeah.
So that it's scary, but that's why I really appreciate a space like this, because usually we're sitting by ourselves thinking of that, and something like this where we can like talk about it and even like laugh a little bit and just kind of, I don't know, death positivity is that's a good way to put it, because I just don't know, and I'm not going to, and by the time I do, I'm not going to be able to report back. And it's everything else people can kind of like tell me or write a book and tell me what it feels like, or poetry. This is like the one thing that no one can actually tell me, right, through poetry or something,
definitive.
like what it's like.
Yeah.
So
I feel like death positivity for me is like, I feel like to some extent I'm just lying to myself. I'm like, let's be positive about this. Let's talk about
like
it.
crying,
But
like,
internally, they're like screaming, like, "Oh my God, why are we doing this?"
Okay, but that probably means you're doing the work, right?
Exactly.
Like that's,
yeah.
I think that means it's not like it's not a destination. It's like being a sex therapist. I'm like, all I do is work on sex positivity. Does that mean I have no internalized sex negativity? No, I grew up in the United States. That's what we are, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this ongoing, right? Until I've reached it, until I'm dead.
Yeah.
I'm just like an ongoing, right? Like creating
push
death
and pull.
positive spaces. Yeah. Right. So I think that means we're coming face to face with it. If we feel that like discomfort, we feel afraid, means like we're not ignoring it.
Yeah.
Which is part of death positivity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or even neutrality. I'll take some like neutrality.
Yeah.
I will like start there. That's great. And
Yeah.
that's what I think, like this space, like I'm finding more like grief neutral community, which like that's why I lean into my Instagram page, is there's like folks who are really talking about all of it, versus in my daily life I'm not like stopping, the like store clerk to be like, what are your thoughts on death, right? But this community,
I want to.
I would like to see what they think.
Yeah.
But that's what's really cool about these online spaces and these podcasts, is like we get to create, right, like our own little communities of people who are saying like, yeah, let's talk about this, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. And like you said, we don't have to be in a vacuum of just like me sitting in a room and being like, what do I actually think? Like, and that is fun for a little bit, but like, if you don't time that right, it can spiral out and it can get to like, a really dark place. And then it is, I think, and that at that point, it's like, okay, now how do I shove this down? How do I get out of this feeling? Cause this is a lot. This is too much to deal with right now.
Absolutely. I'm like, this feels way better than at 3 a.m. when I'm by myself and my like frontal lobe and rational thinking shuts down, but my amygdala is like wide awake, thinks like, okay, it's happening now. Or like that. And like,
it's always 3 a.m.
It's
too.
always,
always 3 a.m.
They say there's like studies around it that is when like the frontal part that can do all the rational thinking and grounds you and calms you down. Like that part stays asleep, and the amygdala, when that wakes up, it stays awake. And so you have all this like anxious thinking, and none of the part that's like, hey, you're fine right now, you don't need to do that right now. It's like,
let's
no, I need to sleep about that.
It's like, no, this is the perfect time for this.
Yeah. So same with like grief response, all of that. I always wondered like, oh my gosh, I hate waking up in the middle of the night and I feel things so heavily and I feel like nothing grounds me. And it's because, you're like half your brain shut down. It's still sleeping. And the other part doesn't need sleep because it's always there to like let you know about danger. So no, I like that there's spaces like this where we're not by ourselves. We're able to like tap into the frontal parts of our brain that like keep us grounded, keep us like laughing, or whatever, and not just like doom, panic by ourselves in the middle of the night, right?
Yeah. And I think, and not to like bring it back too much, but it's like, and I think that's times too where it's like, I could pull out your poetry and read a poem and be like, okay, this is still tapping into that nervous mind that like wants to think about death, but at least this is interacting with someone else in kind of a non-direct way. But I do think it is helpful to have those resources too, because there are times where we can't do this, right? We can't interact with one another. And it's like, I just want to know other people are feeling things, because we live in a culture where we're portraying a certain life to each other. And like, look at all the cool things I'm doing. Look how great I am. When all of us are all deep down miserable to some extent.
Everyone's crying. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's nice to read something like, you know, your book and know that like other people are experiencing real things.
Absolutely. Like real.
Yeah.
Same thing with social media. I love it. And it connects me to poets and people and everything. And I also have to limit myself because it's so, I don't know, like cultivated.
Yeah.
I mean, right. It's like
It's
content
curated.
created. Yeah. Yes. Yes. That's the word. Not cultivated, curated. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't tell what's real anymore. And I'm just assuming like, okay, all this is not real. And when we talk about something like grief, death, right, birth, any of these things, it's like as real as it gets. It's existed long before social media, before, you know, half the things that we live with, most of the things we live with. It's like the most human experiences. And I cannot have that, like, I don't know, edited and made and just like sugarcoated or whatever and put in like a 30-second reel.
Yeah.
It's like, it's such an experience. And yeah, I'm like, I process the best and like, you know, interacting with someone that like, as we're social creatures, right?
Yeah.
But you can't have that processing with someone all the time. I can't constantly process every thought with people. You need support that you can have like by yourself.
Yeah.
And that's where like books and podcasts and journaling and all of these things
Art.
come in, because yeah, I'm like, I can't always be talking to my friends when I'm sad or when I'm thinking of things, or my therapist. You need like solo supports.
Yeah.
And self-soothing. And I really like that poetry. You know, I don't read my own poetry, but I read others. And that is something that I can always feel like seen and, you know, understood. And
Yeah.
no one has to be actually in front of me.
It creates that connection.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So you did touch on it a little bit, and I'm going to do my worst job of reading some of your poetry. Because I think it leads into the big question of the podcast. But
okay, well, just so you know, I don't have any like rhythm or tempo or any. I
was gonna say, tell me if this is an iambic pentameter.
No, I don't even know. No, nothing rhymes. Nothing has a rhythm. You can literally just read it like you're talking. No pressure.
I can't be sure if anything makes it past death, but if such an energy or soul exists, I know for certain that yours is a mix of gentle love and sunsets. Once held together by flesh and bones, I can't be sure why I couldn't convince your soul to stay that way a while longer. Why I must say this to the sky and not to the face I adore. And so, I know you say you don't know what happens past death, but the big question is, what do you think happens when we die? And you did talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, let me just have my like panic attack about it. Okay,
Yeah,
so
feel all the feels.
Yeah, I'm like, I feel that question. How do I avoid it? No, that's what I'm here for. So I think I need to break it up into, here's what half of me really hopes or would love to happen, and here's what I'm kind of worried, or here's like the realistic science part of me. So hope, the hopeful griever in me absolutely loves the idea of somehow us having like a part of us still exists, right? So whether that be a soul or energy, like I said, that is somehow still us in some way, right? I know it probably wouldn't, maybe even not like human, but somehow be us. And the idea of like your energy finding its way back to like other energies you've loved before. Even if we don't get to find other energies we loved before, like it would be cool to kind of come back as something a little more chill and not a human. That's something in us, right? Like humans don't always like the idea of like you just end, right?
Yeah.
And nothing about you exists after. Some people that sounds like a relief. Like, please don't send me back as a rock or send me back as another human, like reincarnation.
I did go to this talk with a couple of monks, and they were kind of joking about reincarnation. And they joked that a dog is like 2 or 3 steps before human. They're like, oh, humans are the coolest. Humans are the coolest. And cats are 1 step after, or it's
Oh
just
my
like,
God.
yeah, being human sucked. Like, I'm done.
That's
And I
so,
was just, and it was like, yeah, I can actually see that. Like, if
that
there
is
were like
hilarious.
levels, a cat would
Yes.
totally be after being human. We're just like, yep, glad I'm done with that.
Glad that's over with, right? And a dog's like, awesome, awesome,
Yeah,
awesome.
this is going to be so
Yes.
great.
Yes. But that idea that we don't just end, I'm like, I get something about that feels so comforting. So I mean, I grew up with, my family was Christian and there's like Catholic in my family. I'm not religious. I never really felt connected to that. Like something just, so I don't know. I think people have usually said it would be more like agnostic,
Yeah.
to where I really like the idea of there being like energy or, something that exists that we just like as humans wouldn't know. So that's like the hopeful side of me, is like the agnostic part.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah, there's definitely some way, our soul still exists, or, we will be together again, just because I want so badly to say, okay, this life is really hard, losing people is really hard, I'm going to see him again. Like, what could be more
Yeah.
comforting? That
Yeah.
helps
Some
me
sort of
sleep.
reconnection.
Yeah, like, I'll see you again. I'll see you again, right? So much of my poetry is like, I'm going to see you again, like, right? And then there's the part of me that, like, the scientists, right? Like, you say, like, here's the people who are like not religious, not spiritual, just like, hey, I hate to break it to you, but like, you're gone, you're gone.
Yeah.
And I sometimes lean into that and say, like, okay, right? Like, my mom is gone. Like, her energy, like, I do believe like energy isn't created nor destroyed.
Yeah.
But that doesn't
that
necessarily mean
is
it's her. We know
science,
that.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm like, I
yeah.
didn't just make that. That's
Yeah.
not like I wonder. Like, we know that. I just don't get to choose what the energy might, like, what that would mean, right?
Yeah.
Does it just go into like stardust? Does that mean, right? Like,
Yeah.
when
And
she
is
was
consciousness
cremated, did
part
it?
of that energy, right? Yeah.
Right. That's the part. So yeah, the idea of it just being like she's gone, and my baby niece was gone before she really could even exist or have consciousness or have beliefs, anything, or
Yeah.
anything like that. It's like it breaks my heart, but I also think like that there's like a 50% chance of that. I don't lean into it so much because I think that's the part that really will make my heart race, and that's the part that really
Yeah.
gets me
That's the
sad.
scary. Yeah. That's
That's
the
the
scary one.
scary, right?
Because
Obviously it's
nothing is scary.
and I know, there could be heaven, hell. I know the idea of hell is like super scary. And I grew up with that, right? Of like people going to hell. And I'm like, well, okay. And, a lot of people said if you complete suicide, right, you go to hell. And I'm like, there's no way, if this exists, my mom was there. Like, there's just no way. So I don't resonate with the whole, like, there's this heaven and there's this hell. But I love the idea of like your energy resting, right? And you're no longer in this like vessel and
Yeah.
human form and pain and all of that. I like the idea of like my mom resting, but I know there's a chance that like there is no her at all, and all that's left of her is like what we remember and like her name and documents and things like that. And
Yeah.
that might happen for me as well, right? Like, it's
Do you still
scary.
feel like you have a connection with your mom? I've definitely talked to a couple people where it's like a little bit of what we're talking about, where it's like, yeah, I didn't really have any beliefs, kind of just felt like nothing happens. And then, my dad died, or, whoever died. And it was like, I know they're there. Do you feel that? Or is it more just like you're carrying the memories?
Yeah. She my mom talked about death, right? She was not afraid, if anything, right? Obviously she completed suicide. So death felt like a relief to her. Like, it was hard being alive. She was living with so much. So life was scary. Like, that feeling we get when we talk about death is what she got when she would think about like life at times. So she would talk about death with us, and she was like, Sarah, you were just not good at death. Like, my gosh, like, honey, it's natural. It's normal. Like, I know you're not good with death, but like, I'll always be with you, right? I'll always be with you. You just have to believe I'm there, right? You just have to, it wasn't about religion. It was just like, you got to know I'm there. I would never part from you. Like, you cannot separate, me, I have 3 siblings. Like, I'm with the 4 of you always. And so she really made me think she'd be haunting me, right? Like, good. Like, So I just thought like, yeah, if something happened, it was like my worst fear of my mom dying, and it happened. And I thought I would feel it so much more. And I'm like, all right, mom, like you made a lot of heavy promises, a lot of big promises. Where are the flickering lights? So I have had to find her. You know, I dreamt of my mom, like even last night, dreamt of my mom, especially right after, because again, my brain was processing and so much of it felt like she was visiting me. And I just, the pessimistic side of me was like, no, your brain is processing. You're a trauma therapist. This is how the brain processes trauma. It's doing it while you're sleeping. But so much of it sometimes felt like it was her, and it was her visiting me and trying to like tell me things. And again, could just be my brain doing that. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't close the doors to that. I have not like gone to a psychic. I haven't done like any, gone to a medium or anything like that at this point. I'm open to it. I probably would be open to it. So I just try to find her in things, but it's not like stuff is like in my face the way some people find signs. It's a lot of like sunsets, and a song will come on in the way my life has played out with like just a few months after she died. I like connected with my now husband, and I have 2 daughters, and I started a private practice, which she knew was like my dream. It weirdly felt like she pieced my life together. And before she died, she said, like, I know you're going to be okay. You have to let me go. And this is our last conversation. So like, absolutely not. You're nuts. Like, I'm not letting you go. Like, or something's wrong. Right. And she kept saying like, you're all going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I promise. And I was like, you don't. You're right. Here's me at like 28. Like, what is going on right now?
Yeah.
And there's sometimes where I'm like, is that like the big sign? Was her like, right, like in her goodbye and in this leaving me, she knew, right, somehow I would find like these really, or create like literally birth 2 humans, right, that would become like my world. And it is, I named, they have like SR initials, like, Ryan's my middle name. And so I played on that. So I kind of keep her memory, a lot of it's me.
Yeah.
But I do try to look for signs. I was really thinking she was going to make it a lot more haunty-ish for me, and like a lot more just like daily, like, look, I'm right here. And I think it's just harder.
That's
and
what
also,
my
right,
mom would definitely do. She'd be like banging the doors at 3 a.m.
Yeah, I'm like, why? Where's the like? Oh my gosh, yeah, like lights are turning on. All like, I kind of figured it would be like that, right? It would be this like in your face, and she probably did mean like more subtle, and I'm just being lazy about it. But no, I'm definitely not closed off. There's not been a moment where I'm like, I know for sure that there's like this afterlife where we'll be together. I truly wish I did. And I write about it because that's how I cope, is like, please tell me there's something. Yeah. Please tell me we are going to like find each other again. That is like, I write a lot about like the hopeful side of me writes like that often.
I think you and I are probably very similarly minded, where it's like we have this like very strong analytical brain, but then we also have our creative side. And it's like, I think the analytical side is much stronger than my creative side. Like it's more strong-willed. And so it's like when I do start to have those like hopeful thoughts of like, I don't even know. I think that's part of my problem. I do think, individuality, I think that's an interesting thing, because it's like, how do we imagine something that's not individual? Getting our analytical minds out of the way a little bit to be like, and I think some of what I tell myself is it's like, we do have all this science and stuff, but like, it wasn't that long ago that Earth was the center of the universe. And so it's like, we know what we know, but I think it's one thing that you touch on a lot, and it obviously comes up on the podcast a lot or just in conversation, is energy. Like, I don't think we really understand energy. And then obviously we don't really understand consciousness.
No.
So it's like, and I think that ultimately is kind of the secondary question to this project, besides, what do you think happens when we die? I just think for both of us, I hope that we can find the thing that we can just say, this gives me some peace, and accept that and believe it, because a lot of us are probably wrong.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
and
we won't know.
Yeah, and we're not
We
going to
won't
find
know.
out. And so it's like, I think that's, again, the analytical side. It's hard to just be like, to have like blind faith or whatever. But sometimes I'm just like, dude, just believe in something and believe it with your whole heart, because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. You don't need to be right on this. You're probably not going to be right on this. And so just believe something. And like, at the end of the day, you are judged on what you believed and you got it wrong. Like, I mean, okay, like what else could you have done?
No one's gonna know if I'm wrong. I could
Yeah.
say like, this is gonna happen when I die. You're not gonna know
Yeah.
if I was right or wrong.
Yeah.
You don't know where I am at.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what, like with this, I was having a hard time after, my mom died and things. I was running into just like, where is just like grief, death talk without someone trying to for sure tell me like they're in this particular heaven
Yep.
or they're not. Right. And this community that I have is like, I get to hear all of it, but like we all get to connect and like everyone's dying, everyone grieves. And it has been really lovely that there's not a lot of argument. And maybe I'm guessing, if folks are very religious, they have certain like an organized religion they, resonate with or they follow, my stuff might not be, right? Maybe they do need to be talking more, about heaven or no talk about a soul.
Yeah.
And I talk about souls or something, right? And I just like the broad conversation of the like, I'm not sure and I promise like I won't pretend to know. I need to like read that. But you're right. It's like I hope that if I have the privilege of dying like a very chill death where I'm like on a deathbed and know it's happening, I hope I'm not like panicked. I really hope that whatever it is I like decide, or maybe I'm still just hanging out at the fork in the road of not knowing which one. I hope I'm not doing it in like a panicked way. I really hope I'm not like afraid.
Yeah.
I know when my grandma passed, like, I think she was really afraid to die. She grew up Catholic, but much older, different generation. And she was like, absolute. And I mean, this woman was an angel on earth. And she was so terrified of going to hell that I was like, all right, whatever I believe in, please do not make me be that. I don't want to feel that afraid. I don't want to feel that fear. Right. And that's not like that's nothing about Catholicism, right? That's just like ways it was taught. And I think the same thing can happen with like atheism. I have friends that are atheists too. And I'm like, sometimes the science is freaking me out. You're kind of freaking me out that like, right. And I am very curious. I'm very open-minded. So I like to sit and hear about all of it. And that's what I love is like when you open these conversations, you get to hear so much.
Yeah.
And I think I have so many different parts of my brain trying to work it out. And I don't just have like blind faith about any particular thing, which is probably why I'm anxious because I can't just pick one. And I talk with people, and they're like, oh, I can't wait to meet my loved one again. And I'm like, yes, like love that. I will never say like, you sure?
Yeah.
You sure? No, I'm just like, yes, I hope so too. I can't wait for that.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. Or if I write that and people are like, oh, I used to think that too, but most likely nothing happens. And I'm like, can you just let me?
Yeah.
Can you just let me?
I mean, that's one of those ones where it's like, what's the point? I think that's my thing in general is it's like, if you believe in heaven and hell, awesome. If you believe in reincarnation, awesome. If you believe, my friend who was on the podcast, the nothingness, she just calls it a dirt believer. If you're a dirt believer, awesome. But you don't need to shove your beliefs on other people. Like, other people get to figure it out and process and decipher what they believe. And so like, I'm all for like all ideas and all beliefs. And ultimately, like you just said, what brings you peace in that moment of death so that you're not afraid and freaking out? Like, I think it's probably already like a very, very, very big moment. And to add anxiety and fear and all these other emotions, I think, like you said, you being as at peace as possible in that moment is the ideal. And so, whatever you believe, awesome. And like, believe it with your full heart. But just because someone else doesn't believe that doesn't mean they're like, I think that's the biggest thing is it's like, who cares if you're right and who's wrong? We're not going to know.
Yeah, we're not going to know. And do what you got. Like, I like losing someone, death, loss brings out a part of this conversation. You don't really have to think about what happens to people until someone you love or a celebrity that you're bonded with, someone who has influenced you dies, and you're wondering, where are they? What happened? Are they around? Can I talk to them still? Can I write to them? All these things. Eventually that's going to hit someone to think like, oh my gosh, where do we go? What happens? I think everyone thinks about that at some point. And I'm
I
like,
sure hope
hey,
so.
I mean, like kids and stuff, I'm glad you don't have to, babies, I'm glad you're not thinking about death. Like, lovely. Don't stay away from it, I guess, as long as you can, unless we're talking about it. And I know my mom tried to talk about it in healthy ways. And apparently I was just like, don't even talk about dying. I can't handle it. And still here I am publishing just book after book about her. So I wish she could see it now to be like, I told you, you would not process this well.
I knew this is what was going to happen.
I knew you were going to be so dramatic and not handle me dying well. And I was like, no, you're right. I did not handle it well. So
you're right again.
Yeah, here we are. You're right. And I'm not good with death, Mom. So no, I think eventually someone's going to think about it at some point. And I hope it just doesn't stop anyone from doing what helps them. If they feel like connecting to someone who's died, I talk to my mom, I talk to her urn, right? I write to her, I do all these things, and they could be going nowhere. It could be going to nothing, right? And to me, it's worth the energy. I don't mind, because there could be a chance. There's a chance it makes it to her. There's a chance she's still around in some way. And if
definitely
not,
helps you.
Right. It's that like continuing bonds, like you hear people talk about. So I'm like, I will take the risk and reward here that I'm not losing much energy, and the reward could be something I'm happy about.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
And if folks don't want to do that, that's great. But no judgment. I have very religious folks in the community I'm with. I have, atheist, science-based folks, everything in between, people asking questions, and good. Like, as long as we are like talking about death in safe, non-judgmental ways.
Yeah.
Because we're going to die, and everyone we love is going to die. And I mean that, and to not be so depressing, but it sounds really depressing when I say that. Just like no judgments. I'm like, I know.
That's just the way it goes.
And that's it. Yeah.
If you were to die tomorrow, what would you want your loved ones and your friends to know?
I forgot we were going over this question. Oh my gosh. I just talked about this in my own therapy this morning.
You really prepped for this interview.
No, it was not about this. I was thinking it was my own It was my own. I'm talking about death and dying, and I don't know what my identities are. So I accidentally processed this in therapy, and I did not have an answer completely. But I would say I used to want people to talk about like all of my success and how hard I worked in school and my credentials, and I always identified as like a therapist, and I wanted to be smart. I think we
are very, very similar people.
I was like I'm like, okay, I won't be the prettiest, and I know I'm not the smartest and all this, but I want people to know I worked hard, and I want people to know I wasn't lazy and I was high achieving. And I have had to let that go since becoming a mom, and my career is not my everything anymore. In poetry, I'm not letting it be my like full-time gig. It's like this hobby that's between my mother and I. So I think it's more about like the characteristics about me. I would want people to say that I like loved deeply, because I definitely do. And I grieve deeply, if anyone hasn't figured that out. So I love really deeply. And I would want people, I guess, to say, if you were loved by her, you knew it, and you felt every bit of it. I hope people would say, I'm kind and caring. I wanted to help people. And I guess I more think of like my daughters. Like I hope my daughters know that if there's any possible way that I can be around, just like my mom said, like I will never leave them, right? Like I will find a way back to you if that's possible. But if I can't, just like carry me with you in all the ways, right? In your kindness and your love and your creativity, and find any way, like I'm going to live through them.
Yeah.
And not everyone gets that, but I think we live through people, whether by blood or not. So it's not just because they're my blood, but I hope because they were loved by me, and whoever's loved by me, I hope they carry a little bit of me with them. Yeah. Even if I can't come haunt anybody, if I can't come
at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
I'll be flickering the lights at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So that's me.
I'll be pounding on the door and making you not sleep. Or so if I can, I will probably, because I'm just like, I love you. Don't forget, even in death.
I'm still here.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it used to be a lot of roles and identities and titles. And now it's more like, I hope you always know, like, I loved you, and I hope that never leaves. And if that's the only thing people remember me by, like, I'm so good with that.
I think that also might be an age thing, because there was definitely for a long time that it's like, I wanted to be the best track athlete. I want to go to the
Oh yeah.
Olympics, this and that. And then when my track career ended and photography started, it was like, I want to be the best photographer. I want to do this and that. And then it's just like, I just realized over the last couple of years, being the best, it's a lot of work, and it's not even a lot of in your control. That moment when you start a lot of what you're saying, it's like it's the connections you have with people. It's the way, like, that's what I want people to remember. It's stuff like that that I think is what truly matters versus the stuff we did, because nobody's gonna remember the stuff we did. Nobody's gonna remember how fast I ran or, what companies I worked for. But I do think people will remember the way that I made them feel, or I hope so. And I think, I mean, from what you're saying and like from our conversations, like I know that's true about you too.
Yeah, we know that, right? People don't forget how you make them feel. I think all the stats and all these other things, it's just so ego based. And it's not our fault. That's just like what I
That's
think 20s are, and probably some third, right? Like,
And it's
it was,
society too, right? Is
yeah,
it's like your age
society,
and like the way that
success.
our culture is set up.
Yeah, yeah. It was set up to be like, here's everything I've done. And I was like, how many credentials and how much training, and I'm going to be the best therapist. And I was just, A, I'm tired. Two, my mom
So
died, and I was like, well, none of that matters. Oh, death is coming for us all.
Yeah.
Nothing matters. And then third, I realized, like, they asked in a college course I took, I loved philosophy, and there was one about like philosophy of religion.
Mm.
And one of the questions he asked was like, write the eulogy, like write what you'd want someone to like say about you. And it was so interesting how like it was all, so much of it was about like what we did. I'm going to be the best this, I'm going to be the best this, I'm going to be a professor, a doctor, all this stuff. And he did say, like, I'm curious about what you'll say 10, 20,
I was gonna
30
say
years from
that
now. And I'm like,
experiment
yeah, ask
every
me. Yeah.
5 years would be really interesting to just see
Yes.
how it changes.
It changed so much. And it probably took, losing loved ones to say, like, I did not care what my mom did professionally or not, but I know she was a good mom, and she loved, and people, if you knew her smile and her loud laugh, and she was kind to everybody. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what a wonderful way to be remembered. And now everyone gets to read about her in these books and
Yeah.
know that she's, people are writing about her, and she gets to live that. Like, that feels so much more important. But to my 22-year-old brain,
Yeah.
at some point it was like, yeah, be the best, be the smartest.
Yeah, of course, because that's what we thought people valued us for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
Your
just
productivity and all of the, and yeah, just, I think you kind of grow up, and you experience pain and loss and all these things, and you're like, yeah, that probably doesn't matter all that much, I thought. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
None of this is gonna come with me.
Yeah, none of this comes, I guess, but people will be left behind, and like the ones that knew you will remember
Yeah.
if you were kind or all that. So
Yeah.
that one wasn't too hard.
Yeah.
I'll probably just have to process it in therapy again, but that's all right. I'll take another session about it.
I was gonna say that's what therapy's for.
That's what
right?
it's for. I'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for doing this and coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it was just great to chat with you. And like, I don't know, I think we talked about this a little bit when we first chatted, but it's like when I first started the podcast, it was like, okay, I'm just going to ask my friends because I don't know what I'm doing. And like, I'm talking about death and this is weird. And then it's like, you start finding, I think that's the thing I love about the When We Die Talks Instagram page is I don't follow that many people. And so the people that I follow are very specific. And therefore, the stuff that comes to me is related to death. And so that's how your stuff popped up. And it's like, oh, this is how social media should work.
I feel like people want to have conversations. The ones that don't, they'll tell you. But
Yeah.
this is, I mean, these conversations, I think, are healing. I think they're going to change the world. So it may not feel like you're doing much, or you feel like you're bothering people, but like, this is what we need to do, at least death neutrality, and talk about
I like death neutrality. I like
I'm
like
like a
that better
body
than.
neutral person, and
I
so
think
I'm
that's
also
way
like,
better than death positivity.
yeah,
Let's
no,
go
I
with
mean,
neutrality. Like,
yeah,
hey,
neutrality is
let's not
cool.
shoot too high.
Yeah, I'm like flying too close
Again,
to the sun here.
we're tired.
Yeah, we're tired. I'll take neutral. So no, I think, yeah, have these conversations. This is what needs to be done, right? It normalizes it because it's going to happen. So
Yeah.
no, I'm glad you reached out. This was a great. Again, I don't have this talk often, so it's good. This is good for me too. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I'm glad. Do you want to let people know the best way to find you?
Oh, yeah. So I'm most active on Instagram. So it's Sara Rian Books. So it's Sara_Rian_books. That's where I post, like, I write poems, and if I write them, I post them almost immediately. If you can direct message me. There's no one else that handles any of my stuff. It's just me. I have a Facebook page, Sara Rian Books, and then SaraRianBooks.com is my website. But all of it comes back to me if you message or something. So it doesn't matter which way you reach out, but that's where you can find my books and most up-to-date poetry. And I have a newsletter if you feel like signing up to see some like up-to-date stuff. Yeah, so
Perfect.
we're out there.
I was gonna say I'll put that all in the show notes too. And you
Cool.
mentioned Substack. Like this past weekend, I was like, you know what? I am not a writer, but I was like, I kind of feel like Substack might be a great place for this project. So I'm like gonna start putting stuff over there.
You should. It's that community. Mine, obviously, like the algorithm kicked to where it's like all poets, but it feels so positive and I do it for like the newsletter to send the emails, but I hopped on the app and there's a feed and there's no ads, and it's just been like a
ads. What?
No ads. Yeah, can you believe it? I'm like, oh, someone's selling me something.
Yeah, totally.
So it's maybe your photography, right?
Probably.
Is on there selling me something. No, so highly recommend. I'm not like a writer like that. I write 5 sentences and I'm like, there it is. There's my poem.
Hey, they're great.
But these newsletters and these posts can be so short that I think it's a really wonderful way to reach people. So I highly recommend Substack. Yeah, it's been great so far.
Sweet. And we kind of talked about it, and I don't necessarily know exactly how we're going to do it, but we're going to give away like a couple signed books.
Yeah. Yes.
So I would just say somewhere in the show notes will probably be a link to an Instagram post if you want to like enter to win. I don't exactly know what we'll do, but we'll give away a couple books.
We're doing something. We're giving some signed books away. So just stay tuned.
Somehow, some way.
Yeah.
But I didn't really think through the logistics of it yet. So,
Nope.
But yeah, again, thank you so much. I don't know. I don't know if you want to read a poem to finish out, or if you don't want to, it's totally fine.
Okay. I'll always be in awe of how deeply we grieve, how love stays the course through the angriest seas, how it will not capsize when death tries to swallow it up. When I bump into strangers and their grief falls to the floor like coins spilling from a purse, I can't help but put my hand on theirs so they don't rush to pick it up. I can't look away. I don't want to miss how beautifully devastating and devastatingly beautiful grief is when we set it free. Shame shouldn't be allowed anywhere near it. We die and leave behind gardens of who we were, and our people love us so much that they spend the rest of their lives tending to them so that no one forgets what we've planted. So that one's not in a book yet.
That's great.
I love that doesn't rely on an afterlife. So it doesn't matter like what you believe, but we know for sure that if you're loved here and remembered here, that your garden kind of stays like tended to, and everything you planted and done kind of stays. And that feels very peaceful. That like I don't have to know what happens, but I love the way we grieve, and it means we love, which means we remember, which means like we stay alive in some ways. So yeah, that one I like that one.
I love it. And thank you so much again, and glad we could do this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of When We Die Talks. I hope today's conversation sparked some thoughts and helped you feel a little more at ease with the idea of death. Remember, this journey is all about exploring our beliefs and fears together, so I'd love to hear from you. Call our voicemail at 971-328-0864 and share what you think happens when we die. Your thoughts might just be featured on a future episode and could help others on their own journey. Until next time, have a good life.